I'm not one for fancy intros. Film Theory made a video about role models. I think it's misguided. Let's talk about it.
Most of the male characters that you see across media, both young and old, they're not great. Classic cartoon kids are almost universally bratty, cruel, greedy, or inconsiderate. Even the oldest of old school animated characters that have been sanitized to be as brand safe and neutral today as possible, they started off as horrible jerks.
Abruptly, he becomes an uncontrollable monster.
Well, the goofy clip seems unfair. This is a clip from the short film Motor Mania. The whole point of that short is that getting behind a wheel turns normally polite, cordial people into jerks and raging lunatics. I agree with the point being made here broadly, but I wouldn't have used a clip from this Jekyll and Hyde-like situation. This isn't indicative of Goofy's normal behavior, and was pointedly meant to be an example of how not to be.
Angry, they're violent, they're not good people. So why do I bring it up in my final episode? Well, as a dad, I've started to pay a lot more attention to these sorts of things in the media that I watch because I want to know if it's something that I can actually share with Ollie. And surprisingly, there isn't a lot that I'm super happy with sharing. And it all comes down to a lack of shows with characters that I actually want Ollie to grow up to be like. At a quick glance, the modern era, it's seen a wide spectrum of overwhelmingly positive, affirming female and female-coded characters.
So these, I take it, are examples of what Matt considers to be positive female characters. We see Anne from Amphibia, Hilda, Star, Dark McStuffins, Marinette from Miraculous Ladybug, Hello Kitty, Bluey, Luz from the Owl House, the Crystal Gems from Steven Universe, Carmen Sandiego, Barbie, and Princess Bubblegum from Adventure Time. Now, Matt doesn't directly say these are good role models precisely, but as they are being presented in contrast to what the boys have, and he will continue to contrast some of them with poor male role models throughout the video, I will assume that he considers each of the ladies shown in this section to be a role model. Now, I have barely watched Bluey or Doc McStuffins, and I didn't know Hello Kitty even had a series, so I will take his word for it that they are good role models. Almost everyone else on this list ought to come with a big asterisk. Star Butterfly is reckless throughout the series, and while she does attempt to grow out of this, the show does end with her making a certain decision that solves her short-term problems, while causing all sorts of new problems and potentially millions of deaths across the multiverse. I don't think that was the writer's intention, but that's what happened. Princess Bubblegum is a cold-hearted despot who deliberately keeps her subjects in a dumbed-down state just so they can't overthrow her. She has created sentient life forms who didn't turn out how she wanted, only to wind up killing or neglecting them. Some of her subjects live in fear of her wrath, lest they step slightly out of line. And I know there are reasons she's like this, but those are still problems. I haven't watched much of Ladybug, but I am told by more frequent viewers that Marinette becomes an increasingly creepy and cowardly stalker as the series goes on. I also haven't seen the Barbie movie, but I'm told that Barbie doesn't actually accomplish anything in the film. If Matt had just said Barbie in general is a good role model, I would agree, but he cites this film specifically, and I don't see how the Barbie in this film does anything to earn the title of role model. I have no idea why Matt cites the Crystal Gems, of all people. They are all among the most messed up good guy characters I've ever seen in children's media. Despite being thousands of years old, they're incapable of processing their past trauma until a 12-year-old walks them through it. They hold the humans they protect in such disdain they can't be bothered to remember their names, or to care when their actions inconvenience them. Two of them engage in the gem equivalent of sexual assault, and I don't even have a word for what Amethyst does to Greg. They are all incapable of diplomacy. Steven's sense of compassion is the only thing stopping them from punching all their problems. Now, you might think I'm being a little hypocritical with these ladies, and I probably am. I don't actually think they're bad characters, or even bad heroes. I like most of them, but I wouldn't hold most of them up as role models, and listening to Matt further will make me wonder why he would.
Then you look over at the boys, and things get a bit more complicated. Sure, there are some truly great and kind characters that I do want my son to look up to. Ryder from the Paw Patrol, fantastic role model. He's smart, he's resourceful, he's caring, he's a leader, and with Dipper from Gravity Falls, also a win for being smart, curious, brave, and a loving brother. Also, there's a handful of solid early educational programming with male protagonists like Arthur, Thomas the Tank Engine, Daniel Tiger.
Arthur? Really? How? Is your definition of role model different from mine?
We're talking about characters that are admirable role models for young boys. Characters whose activity we want them to imitate or look up to as they develop during childhood.
No, it's not. What is it about Arthur Reed that makes you think, I want Ollie to be like him? Because I grew up watching Arthur and I can't think of anything. Now, my issue with Arthur is different from my issue with Star. It's not that Arthur has too many negative traits. It's that he has no traits at all. Arthur's a bit of a blank slate, really. I struggle to describe him in any way other than saying he's normal. I could talk about his relationships with other characters. I could list a bunch of his hobbies and interests, but I can't describe him as a person, and thus I can't point to anything about him that I find admirable. If I heard a kid say, I want to be like Arthur, I wouldn't know what he means. He's not an especially good or bad kid. He's just there, reacting to things in normal, understandable ways. By way of contrast, Arnold from Hey Arnold is also a very normal, average boy, but I can confidently say he is characterized by the desire to help people, even people who aren't very nice. That's not deep characterization, but it's a lot more than I can say for Arthur. And if someone said, I want to be like Arnold is a positive role model, that would make sense. So once again, I am confused as to how Matt evaluates a character as a role model.
Let's talk for a minute about the characters that you'd typically see come up in a conversation like this, right? Well, the problem here is that they tend to have a huge asterisk attached to their names. Captain America, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, the Ninja Turtles, they're all great, but the stories also involve a lot of war, crime, death, fighting in general. They tend to solve most of their problems through punching and physical violence.
Matt recognizes that a lot of people would cite various action heroes as good male role models. It is true that comedies tend to star a lot of idiots, jerks, and generally characters you wouldn't want to spend time around in real life. The action and adventure shows more often star heroes who are strong, brave, resourceful, motivated by a deep sense of duty, justice, and honor. And Matt rejects most of these characters because they tend to find themselves in a lot of violent situations. This one bit ruins the entire thesis for me. Now, to be clear, I'm not here to tell Matt what movies or shows he should share with his kid. That's up to his and his wife's judgment. But I have to disagree on principle with the idea that characters who engage in violence cannot be good role models. This isn't the first time I've heard people express concerns like this, and I have never understood the logic. A portion of the population seems to be concerned that little boys latching onto action heroes will cause them to become violent and destructive in real life, as if children have no ability to recognize the appropriateness of violence in different situations. Now, maybe I was an unusually intelligent child, and to be fair, I don't think these types of shows formed the bulk of my media consumption in my earliest years, but I never had a problem understanding that characters like Batman and Spider-Man use violence only because they have to. They are in a position where they have to protect the innocent from violent threats, and violent threats often require violent responses. Sometimes it's just the only way they can stop the bad guys. Even as a little kid, I think this has always been clear to me. My problems are not like theirs. I will rarely, if ever, find myself in a situation where I need to use violence to solve a problem. Now, if I ever do, I hope that I will be prepared to fight. A good man should be willing and able to protect those weaker than himself, but in the life that I and most of you lead, these kinds of situations are thankfully rare. So I know that just because these crime fighters beat people up on a regular basis doesn't mean I should as a non-crime fighter, and I don't think most kids are too dumb to figure that out.
Aang, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, they're selfless heroes who do what they think's right no matter what the cost, but they're also sitting smack dab in franchises built on needing to be violent, fighting, often killing soldiers, stormtroopers, dark wizards. Not generally a drawback that you're facing from traditionally feminine skewing characters like Sophia the First or Elena of Avalor.
This comparison is wildly inappropriate. It would be weird if the princesses were beating up bad guys all the time, because that's not what princesses do. Sophia and Elena are not vigilantes or knights or crime fighters. They're princesses. It is not the place of a princess to beat up the bad guys. Now, I haven't watched either of these shows, but I assume they both use diplomacy or wit to solve most of their problems, as is appropriate for the role of a princess. That doesn't make them better or worse than superheroes. Everyone is behaving appropriately for the role they have to play, and that is all I ask of a good role model. I find this to be an extremely simplistic evaluation of these characters. If you've watched them, you know that most of them don't enjoy hurting people. Half of them have a no-kill policy, even when dealing with enemies who would happily kill them. Many of them would much prefer to solve their problems with diplomacy, and whenever they can, they do. They only resort to violence when all other solutions are unavailable. It's not like they're walking around looking for excuses to hit people. Remember when Aang was told by everyone that killing the Fire Lord was the only way to end the war, but he stood by his convictions and found another solution? Remember how Luke refused to kill his father and his steadfastness turned Vader back to the light side? When I look at this collection of characters, I see a lot of kind, compassionate men who just want to keep everyone safe. These guys are so nice. They regularly show compassion to their enemies. They're a lot like Arnold, actually. Furthermore, this rejection of male heroes seems inconsistent with remarks from earlier in the video. At the beginning of the video, Matt talked about how surprisingly difficult it is to come up with a list of 5 strong father figures from children's media. He and his team eventually landed on a list that includes Arthur Weasley, Uncle Iroh, and Mufasa. I find this interesting because all 3 of those men are violent. It's probably not the first thing you remember about them, but they are all willing and ready to enact violence when given a good reason to. I'm not sure why their violence doesn't degenerate them as positive role models, but it does for the likes of Superman or Captain America. Unless it is just a matter of degrees. Maybe when you think of Batman, the first thing that comes to mind is his beating up bad guys. But when you think of Iroh, the first thing that comes to mind is him enjoying tea. So in your mind, Iroh equals peace and Batman equals violence. But that's an extremely shallow understanding of both characters. Now you may think it inappropriate for me to demand we look so deeply into the nuances of these characters. Surely most children have only a surface level understanding of these characters, so Matt's simplistic descriptions of them accurately reflect what most kids will take away. And to that I say, do they though? I mean, sure, I wouldn't expect a 9-year-old to be able to give an eloquent explanation of He-Man's philosophy for life, but does that mean he doesn't absorb it? He's not impacted by it at all? If Spider-Man did all the same crime fighting without the restraint, or the compassion, or the sense of responsibility, would it have the exact same impact on the kid? I think everyone notices those virtues. Not everyone has the words to unpack them, but everyone can see them. No one thinks Superman and the Punisher are the same. I don't believe it's possible to watch these guys and see how well they fight without also seeing how much they care for people. And I don't think Matt thinks the nuances don't matter, because he has no problem going into the details and the positive traits of the Princess Bubblegum, Barbie, Ryder, or Dipper. His evaluation of what he considers good role models goes much deeper than I would expect any child to be able to explain. But when it gets to the male action heroes, all he has to say is, they always do what they think is right, and that usually involves hitting things. Speaking of the females, there seems to be a double standard here. I understood this to be a list of what Matt considers positive, largely unproblematic female role models in modern media. His list included Anne, Star, Ladybug, Luce, the Crystal Gems, and Carmen Sandiego. All of these characters engage in violence. Not just occasionally, but on a regular basis. One of them is also a notorious thief. Yes, I'm aware, in the Netflix series that Matt is referencing, Carmen only steals things to protect them from other thieves. But that sounds a lot like the same logic I used to justify the male action heroes. They only use violence to protect the innocent from other violent people. And in this case, I can't even say it's a difference in degrees. Fighting is definitely one of the main features of Garnet, just as much as Aang. Stealing is the main feature of Carmen Sandiego, so I don't know why it's okay when they do it, but not when the boys do it. He even cited PB kicking butt in the battlefield as a positive thing. And setting aside the violence, I don't think these girls are more virtuous than the guys Matt mentioned earlier. Now, the uncharitable way to interpret this is to say that Matt is simply holding male and female characters to a different standard. He sees the female leads as making up for the drought of the past, so they get points just for existing. But since male leads have always existed in abundance, he scrutinizes them much more. But I will try to be more charitable than that. I looked through some of the comments to see if anyone else noticed these inconsistencies. I saw someone suggest that the reason violence is only bad when guys do it is because guys do it more. They argued, if I understood correctly, that if every male hero is violent, it implicitly sends the message that men and boys are supposed to be violent. When a female character is violent, it's an exception to the rule, so it doesn't send a message that women and girls are supposed to be violent. For the sake of illustration, maybe for every female superhero, there's 2 princesses to balance her out. Even if the boys have a prince to look up to, he'll tend to be a fighter as well. Now this goes well beyond anything Matt explains, so I have no idea if this is part of his reasoning. Regardless, I don't buy it. First, I don't think any honest person can say male protagonists are always violent. I am going to flash 15 non-violent male protagonists on screen right now to illustrate this point. The violent ones mostly exist within a particular category of characters, the action heroes. If you think all male heroes are violent, you should probably diversify your media consumption. Second point, female action heroes are not an exception to the rule, at least not in my entire lifetime. There's a reason we all laughed at Jennifer Lawrence. There have always been more male action heroes, but female action heroes, new and old, aren't difficult to find. So even if action is the only thing you watch, I don't understand where you'd get the impression that violence is a thing men do constantly and women don't. But maybe I'm looking at this from a weird angle. See, I typically don't categorize characters according to their gender. I don't judge them as male or female in comparison to other males or females, nor do I look at everything that has a female protagonist to think it's a girl's show. If I'm going to categorize fiction, I'll more likely categorize it by genre. You could say the action-adventure genre promotes violence, and that statement would make a lot more sense to me. It's reductive, but it sounds more logical than what I've heard in this video. Characters in action-adventure stories, male and female, tend to find themselves in a lot of violent situations. Characters outside these types of stories rarely need to engage in violence. If you have a problem with children watching male superheroes, I think your real problem is with children watching action as a genre. Does anyone actually think men fight people instead of superheroes fight people or vigilantes fight people? But perhaps Matt is coming with the assumption of boys watching male heroes and wanting to imitate them, while girls watch female heroes and want to imitate them. He's analyzing each sex in a vacuum. With this context, the boys, theoretically, would have to choose between either amusing fools or the virtuous but blood-stained action hero. Meanwhile, girls would have plenty of legitimate violent and non-violent heroes to choose from. And that actually makes more sense. I have no idea how well this strict gender separation comports with how most kids' minds work, but adopting this framework does make Matt's arguments make a lot more sense than they did before. Maybe my mistake was judging each character as an individual than as a representative of their gender, and now that I've said that out loud, I realize I just implied Matt is sexist. I still think he's wrong. I can think of plenty of non-action, non-jerk male characters. There may be more of them who exist at the extremes compared to females, but more moderate characters aren't difficult to think of. But like I said, this goes well beyond what he explains, so I'm not really sure if this is where he's coming from.
Johnny Bravo's a big ol' womanizer. Timmy Turner's a whiny, spoiled narcissist. Jimmy Neutron's arrogant, destructive, mean to girls, and regularly uses his intelligence as an excuse for being a jerk to his friends. Even Phineas and Ferb, who are smart and resourceful and funny, are outright disobeying their parents each and every day of summer. It's actually the reason Ollie wanted to stop watching the show. He was afraid of them getting in trouble for constantly breaking the rules episode after episode.
I consider Phineas and Ferb to be two of the most wholesome characters in the modern age, so it pains me to see that Matt and Ollie have so severely misinterpreted them. Phineas and Ferb are not breaking any rules. No one has told them they're not allowed to do these things. They have no idea why Candace is so obsessed with showing their mom what they're doing. I have no idea what would happen if their mom actually saw it. If she did tell them to stop, this is dangerous, I have no reason to think they wouldn't obey. Need I remind you that their dad has seen and participated in several of their activities and never raised a word of protest? As far as they know, nobody has a problem with what they're doing. So I'm not sure where Ollie got the idea that they are breaking the rules, as if they're going behind their parents' backs. I think these boys are wonderful role models. They're clever, resourceful, fearless, friendly to everyone, always eager to help, extremely positive. They make the most of every day they've been given. We should all be more like Phineas and Ferb.
That same Gina Davis study that I mentioned earlier noted that male characters, they're more likely to be violent compared to female characters, and also almost twice as likely to be depicted as a criminal.
Isn't that just a reflection of real life? I don't know if this is controversial to say, but men are different from women. The degree of violence is one of those differences. I assume men are also more likely to be criminals, or at least violent criminals, and most of the criminals shown in media would be the violent type. A quick search does indicate that around 80% of people arrested for violent crime are men. But this is also why most action heroes are men. Superheroes, Jedi Knights, and other violent protectors are overwhelmingly male, because in real life, crime fighters, knights, and soldiers and the like are overwhelmingly male. And I don't see why this is a problem. Part of being a good man is using your strength to fight for what's right, to defend and protect others. That is a positive quality to have. If you aspire to be like Superman or He-Man or All Might, that is good. We want more men like them. Women, as the weaker, gentler sex, are not built for this role, and thus are not expected to fulfill it as often. That is why they are not shown playing this role as often in the media. Female role models are more likely to be shown nurturing in some way, or using social skills to solve problems, because this is overwhelmingly what good women do. So if male role models are dominated by the superhero, and female role models are dominated by the princess, I don't see the problem. Those are both good things to aspire to, that lean into the respective strengths of each sex.
I personally like all of these shows and movies. There is no judgment here if you're a fan of any of these sorts of things, but they're just not shows that I can show Ollie until he's much, much older because of the implicit lessons that they contain. Boys are violent. You solve your problems with punching. If you break rules and treat people badly, don't worry, there are no real consequences. You're the main character of your own show, and everything just works out well for you.
That's just not true. Do you even watch cartoons? All those characters who are arrogant, rude, womanizing, short-tempered, they get punished all the time. Characters like Johnny Bravo, The Eds, Donald Duck, they receive retribution all the time, often in ways that feel wildly disproportionate to their crimes. Actually, male characters in general get punished for their sins far more frequently and more harshly than female characters. If anything, media sends the message that you can get away with anything if you're a pretty girl. And to the point of Ollie being too young, I did notice that most of Matt's examples of good male role models from earlier were from preschool shows. Now, I haven't been keeping up with preschool shows the last few years, so I can't comment on them directly, and I'm not sure exactly how old Ollie is, but it sounds like most of the media made specifically for his age might be fine. Like, if he just sticks with age-appropriate media, he'll have plenty of good characters to admire. Again, not here to tell Matt what he should share with his kid. I just find it interesting that all the characters he objects to seem to be from media whose target audience is above Ollie's age.
The consensus for a long time has been that boys are born wild and unruly, while girls just grow up faster. And it's therefore their job to civilize the boys, to get them to want to settle down and act like actual human beings. And that mentality is all over old Disney films. In these older stories, the girl was the reward for the men who grew up. That sort of thinking, boys will be boys and the girl's the trophy that you earned for settling down, it's not great. The justified pushback against that sort of thinking is what's led to a lot of the great girl-targeted media over the past decade. Movies and series written specifically to show that girls aren't just there to be prizes for the boys, or there for the sole purpose of getting their male counterparts to mature. They're their own fully realized people, with beliefs, virtues, flaws, strengths and weaknesses, thoughts and feelings. But now I have to ask, why hasn't something similar happened with boys in the media? Why are so many of these male characters just stuck in the older ways of thinking and writing male characters while girls have gotten to grow up? They're still stuck as Peter Pans.
Here we are shown Aang, Timmy, Phineas, Arnold, Arthur, Ash, SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Samurai Jack, Johnny Bravo, and Charlie Brown, presented as examples of emotionally stunted, immature characters in the tradition of Peter Pan. In my opinion, most of the characters on this screen right now are good, well-rounded, mature, admirable young men. I guess if you accept this video's anti-action hero bias, then the scales tip in the other direction. But what does Matt have against Arnold and Charlie Brown? They're not mean, dumb, or violent. And I thought he said Arthur was a good role model. This image is confusing. And I don't want to hear any nonsense about how I shouldn't fixate on the images that the Theorist team chose to put on screen. Video is a visual medium. The images should match up with what you are saying. If you are making an argument, everything you show me should reinforce it. You can't just throw up random stuff to fill in the space. It makes the whole production look sloppy. Matt or his editors need to be more thoughtful about who they choose to put on screen to illustrate their points. If they are not trying to say these specific characters are emotionally stunted and immature, then they should have shown characters who are. Later in the video, Matt comes to the conclusion that a big part of the reason female characters are allegedly better role models is because toys. Yes, toys. See, when girls play with toys, studies have shown they tend to project themselves onto the toys. But boys tend to play with toys as if the toys are other people. Because of this, Matt theorizes that franchises aimed at girls deliberately give them characters to look up to. Characters they would want to be, while franchises aimed at boys are content to just give them characters who are exciting and entertaining in any way, since the boys will not feel the need to be the character.
And therefore, you get characters that aren't really good people. They're just loud and grab your attention. Because girls typically roleplay in the first person during childhood, there's a greater focus on seeing yourself in these characters from that female-targeted media. They're designed from the ground up to be more appropriate role models because girls would directly identify with those protagonists.
Funny you should show Elsa here. Isn't she evidence against what you're saying? If you've watched Frozen, you know that Anna is clearly the more heroic character. Anna is the one pursuing her sister, putting herself in harm's way to help her. Anna is the one who shows bravery, resourcefulness, and unconditional love. But kids, from what I've seen, tend to favor Elsa because she's the cool one. And I do not apologize for the pun. Her lack of agency throughout the film doesn't seem to matter to the little girls. She's the one with the superpowers, the one with the more glamorous dress and the most popular song, so she's the one the little girls latch onto. This is, of course, anecdotal, but it leads me to suspect young girls don't care about the virtue of their favorite characters any more than little boys do. They both just gravitate to the characters they think are cool.
And that, I think, is a significant part of why these male characters just don't stack up, especially in relation to their female counterparts.
Once again, I find myself distracted by the images used to illustrate this point. Even assuming these girls in the bottom are perfect, which I can't verify, I cannot agree that Superman, Batman, Captain America, and Phineas don't stack up to Luce, Garnet, Ladybug, and Carmen Sandiego. Even if I accept the anti-violence bias, some of these female characters are violent too. In fact, I think those specific male characters are much stronger role models than those specific female characters. And again, I will hear no arguments that I shouldn't engage with the examples the video chose to put in front of me. They could have chosen a selection of characters who would better illustrate their message, and they should have. This is not the time to throw up any old PNGs on screen. The details matter. Now that we've gotten through all the specific examples, I need to make some comments about uneven comparisons. Have you noticed that most of the good role models, especially the female ones, are characters from the last 10 years or so of media? Meanwhile, most of the examples of bad male role models are from older shows. This leaves open the possibility that the issue is with time, not sex. Maybe there used to be no good role models in children's media in general, but now there are. And to some extent, I do think that this is the case. But to seriously analyze the trend, you would need to compare characters from similar kinds of shows during the same time period. For example, Matt states that a lot of really old characters, like the Looney Tunes or Mickey Mouse and his friends, used to be big jerks. And this is true, and almost all of those characters are male. I'm not really familiar with any female characters from old cartoons like these that I could fairly compare them to. I think Betty Boop is less of a jerk than they are, but I'm not sure if Flappers were ever role model material, and she's the only one famous enough for me to remember from those really old cartoons. Later, Matt cites Dexter, Johnny Bravo, Timmy Turner, and Jimmy Neutron as bad role models from the early 2000s cartoons. Now these are the cartoons from my childhood, so I feel I can speak confidently of the trends there. Now if we isolate for the sake of argument Cartoon Network shows from this era, I remember Dexter's Lab, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Johnny Bravo, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Samurai Jack, Billy and Mandy, Kids Next Door, and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, all airing around the same time. Now, most of those cartoons did indeed star people I would not want to hang out with in real life, although I think Samurai Jack is a solid role model, and the Kids Next Door are a step above the others. All the shows I just named star boys and men. The only prominent girls-led show I remember from this era for the original cartoon shows is the Powerpuff Girls. And you know what? The Powerpuff Girls is much more wholesome than most of the shows on that channel at the time. It was the only one of those shows that regularly tried to teach life lessons, and the main characters were genuinely good people trying to do the right thing. Now, is it because the leads were girls that this show had to be wholesome? Did the network tell Craig McCracken he had to make his main characters good people so that more girls would buy their toys? I'm not sure. On the other hand, looking at Powerpuff Girls as an adult, I can't help but notice it is excessively violent, even for a superhero cartoon. Which is weird considering the main characters are cutesy 5-year-old girls. Maybe that was their way of showing they're just as edgy as the other shows? I do also think it's worth noting that between this, Samurai Jack, and Kids Next Door, all the more wholesome characters were from the more action-oriented shows. Funny how that keeps happening. It's also worth noting that within each of these series, the major female co-stars, if they're present, are usually just as bad or as good as the male characters. Mandy is not a better person than Billy. Dee Dee is not a better role model than Dexter. The girls in the Ed's neighborhood are no better than the boys. A lot of the female characters that Matt likes are from recent Disney Channel series, so let's look there next. Modern Disney Channel has the opposite gender imbalance from early Cartoon Network. Almost every show on right now, or in the past couple years, stars a brown girl paired up with a cartoon creature. It is actually weird how consistent this is. There aren't very many boys to compare them to. But to list as many as I can, I think the appropriate counterparts would be Phineas and Ferb, Dipper Pines, Hiro Hamada, Milo Murphy, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and Cricket. Now, I wouldn't put most of those guys on a pedestal, personally, but speaking as someone who has watched most of these shows in their entirety, I think those boys are as good as their female counterparts, which include Rapunzel, Star, Anne, Luce, Molly, Gretel, Lunella, and Haley. And I do realize I'm throwing out a lot of unsubstantiated opinions here. As much as I'd love to break down the merits of each character we've discussed, I'm not getting paid enough to edit a 6-hour video. So I can only hope that anyone familiar with these shows will generally agree with my assessments. But anyway, based on this still very incomplete analysis, I think the trend is that children's media has simply become more wholesome over time. Even on Cartoon Network, if we compare more recent shows with the ones we mentioned earlier, the characters have become significantly better people all around, regardless of sex. I still wouldn't call most of them role models, but they and their recent shows are far less cynical than the pre-Adventure Time shows I grew up with. Now, is it a coincidence that children's cartoons as a whole seem to have become more wholesome at the same time that they're putting more girls in starring roles? I don't know. The same time period has also seen a trend towards plot-driven adventure cartoons, so it could just be that the stories being told these days require more principled characters, or characters whose flaws are taken more seriously. Actually, I think that's probably the main explanation. When I was grade school age, most cartoons were episodic comedies in which continuity was either unimportant or non-existent. Some shows were educational, but plenty of others existed purely to make you laugh. Now, almost every series has some kind of ongoing story arc tying everything together. Almost every episode of every show has a moral message, and every major character has an arc. The stories being told these days are different and require a different kind of character writing. Characters like Billy and Mandy wouldn't fit in a show like The Owl House, unless you add a lot of nuance to them that I don't think their series ever explored. So yeah, I think that's it. The popularity of shows like Avatar and Adventure Time led to a trend of serialized, plot-driven, adventure-oriented cartoons, and at the same time, the industry happened to be pushing for more female creators and female-led shows. Adventure stories, for reasons I can't quite pin down, already tend to star more virtuous characters. The result is a lot of female-led cartoons starring strong, nuanced, positive characters. Or maybe it's the toys. I don't know, that's much harder for me to know. Are these shows even good at selling toys?
If we want our boys to grow up knowing that they should be kind, fair, smart and respectful, thoughtful and strong in all the right ways, we need to set them up for success by putting good examples of these traits in front of them in the shows that they're watching. That way my son, our sons, can have characters worth looking up to.
What's ironic is, I think I agreed with the broad point at the beginning of the video. A disproportionate number of male characters are jerks and idiots. Yeah, that intuitively feels like it's true. But the more Matt got into specifics, the more I begin to wonder if he has an argument at all. The dismissal of action heroes tips the scales wildly, for reasons I am not at all convinced are good. His examples of what he considers good and bad role models seems widely inconsistent, to the point that I have no idea what his criteria for good role models are. He seems to ignore the influence of genre, time period, and target audience in his evaluation, which leads to him making a lot of unfair comparisons. And when I try to make more equal comparisons myself, the quality of male and female role models don't look much different, especially in recent years. I kind of feel bad picking on Matt Pat right after he retired. I do respect his work, I just think this particular theory was poorly argued. I suppose it's easier to be thorough when your theory covers just one franchise rather than an entire medium of entertainment, but hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut.